Starting in 1 more minute, 7:05.
Sure.
Natalie, you can allow people to get in, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
So I got you.
Okay, 7:05. First of all, hello everyone. We are really, really happy to have you all here. On behalf of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists and our president, Natalie Nieves, who's there, and Bianca Silva, who's also there, we want to welcome you to our first event of 2021. I am Deyanira Martinez, and I'm the Vice President of the New York City chapter. And we have an incredible conversation today and a very special guest. As all you know, for over 50 years, the number of Latinos and people of color working in media outlets in the United States has remained flat, never coming close to represent the racial diversity of our communities. However, most media companies are realizing now that diversity makes us stronger and that our stories, the Latinos' stories, really matter. We are thrilled to have with us today an amazing Afro-Latino journalist who paved himself the way from his Dominican neighborhood in Washington Heights to the most prestigious newspaper in the world, the New York Times. He's an award-winning journalist and SEO expert. He began his career in 2004. In 2006, he won an award from the Independent Press Association. Upon graduating in 2008, he worked for Black Enterprise, Amsterdam News, and CBS. But 4 years ago, he joined the New York Times as a senior digital strategy and is now the deputy of platform director of news SEO. And in this role, he's been able to grow the company traffic by over 40%. Welcome, Claudio Cabrera. We are so happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm super grateful for the opportunity.
No, I know it's crazy today with the impeachment news and all of that. You should be very, very busy today.
Yeah, I'm probably going to be working late tonight, but you know, I'm glad to be here and obviously have the conversation and get a little bit of a break from, you know, the craziness that is the news nowadays.
I know. Yeah. Well, we want to start by asking you, what is an SEO expert? You have a very fancy title, but what do you do at the New York Times? What is that?
Yeah, so an SEO expert, really in layman's terms, is well, the definition of SEO expert is search engine optimization. So search engine optimization is basically focused on making sure that the search results that you're looking, the article or the product that you're selling is appearing in the search engines in a high position, right? So usually when you go into the search engines and you type in things like, let's say, the best restaurants in Astoria, right? You probably don't go to the second page or the third page, right? You probably already know that on the first page, Google has pretty much everything that you need, right? Or the right results that they're feeding you. How I like to kind of describe it is that if you own a sneaker store, for example, right? And you want to be the #1 sneaker store in your borough, right? And there's 15 or 20 other sneaker stores there. My job would be to make sure I can get you to the #1 position when people are searching for sneaker stores in a specific area, right? But I do that for news. So on a daily basis, we have everything from news focused on the president, news focused on the new president or the president-elect, and just dealing with all the news that's happened in the last year, from coronavirus to the mass protests across the country. So my job is to make sure that the Times journalism, the journalism that we do, the journalism that a lot of people look up to, is journalism that we get in front of people, both on desktop and on mobile, just so they can consume it at a higher rate. And it's also at the same time really kind of educating digital journalists and editors to just become more focused on tools that are more digitally native, right? So a lot of maybe older journalists and editors from the print era may not necessarily know how to use social media, may not necessarily know how to use what SEO is. And my job, outside of just kind of helping the Times get to a better place on that level, it's also focused on really making sure that the journalists and the editors in that organization just become better, well-rounded, digitally native individuals.
So it's not just writing the news, it's not just being a good writer. You need to know how to write it to make sure that the people see that your work is relevant somehow.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, whenever there's a mass event, right, let's say you're looking at the California wildfires, for example, right, which happened last year and tend to happen every single year, right? There's always that moment where you are covering what happened that specific day, right? But there's always people that are searching in Google about things like, where is the fire now? Is it near me in Oak Oakland or San Francisco or Los Angeles, right? There's people that ask questions like, why do wildfires happen in California all the time? Why don't they happen in New York? Or why don't they happen in Illinois, for example, right? So the main thing, my job is not necessarily just focused on making sure to get the journalism in front of the right people, but also at the same time, bringing ideas to the table that allow the Times editors and reporters to know what people are looking for in their specific beat, right? So if you're a business writer, for example, and you write on personal finance, my job is to go to you as a personal finance writer and really kind of tell you what people are searching for on your specific beat. And also at the same time, also educate you as to, seasonally, what people are searching for, right? So maybe in August or July or September, people are searching more for like back to school stuff and finances related to that. Maybe at another period of the year, they're searching for something else on how to save, maybe around New Year's when people are kind of making resolutions and things of that nature. So it really kind of runs the gamut. So it's a job that's really focused on visibility, but also focused on making sure that editors understand that there's other things that people are looking for that may not necessarily be at the forefront of their mind.
This is really fascinating. Like the way you explain it's really, really fascinating. How do you land this job? How do you go from writing in a small neighborhood paper in Washington Heights to write for the New York Times and to have this position of platform director of SEO news?
Yeah.
How does that happen?
So initially when I graduated from college, I graduated with a journalism degree. So I was doing journalism pretty much. I graduated from Brooklyn College in 2008, and I was pretty much a journalist, a reporter, and editor for about 3 years, right? And then I was working at a company called Interactive One, where I was doing editing work, and I was pretty much editing all types of content. I was editing entertainment content, sports content, really hard news at the same time too. And then what ended up happening is that one day there was a young man there, or older man there, who was the SEO manager at the company. And he told me, hey, if you do this to your headline or do this to your story, it can potentially help it get more audience, more visitors, right? And I did a few of those things under his tutelage. And I was like, oh, wow, this works, right? And at that point in my life, to be honest with you, I was a journalism major, and I'm not a journalism major, but I was already in journalism. And I already knew that I didn't really want to be a reporter or editor, but I also knew that at the same time, I really wanted to kind of stay close to journalism as a product. And I also kind of wanted to be involved in it. And when I found SEO, that was kind of like my in and my out at the same time, right? Because I was out of having to report and edit, but I was still in journalism at the same time. And then I started working, and then I finished off doing SEO at Interactive One. Then I went to Black Enterprise, and then I went to CBS for a few years, where I led SEO nationally for them. And then I started at the Times actually a week before, or a week after President Trump got elected in 2016.
Well, exciting time to start working for the New York Times.
A very exciting time, a very busy time, a very, there's a lot of adjectives I can obviously use, but it's been extremely rewarding. I've learned a lot, and I couldn't think of a better news cycle to kind of be in. Unfortunately, a lot of the events that obviously have occurred aren't the best, and a lot of them are tragic. But in terms of just like my personal advancement, in terms of understanding SEO, in terms of understanding news media, competitors, and things of that nature, it's been extremely beneficial because it's kind of just thrusted me into the fire and forced me to learn on the fly.
That's great. Claudio, how was growing up in Washington Heights? I mean, how was for a Dominican kid growing in America, speaking Spanish at home? Do you always know what you wanted to do professionally? Do you have an idea where you're gonna go?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think when I was growing up, I wanted to be a basketball player like most people, right?
You have a hat.
Well, yeah, it's a baseball. But yeah, I grew up a baseball fan, and big baseball fan, played Little League, all that stuff. And then basketball kind of took over, and I became really interested in that. And then I just got injured and stuff like that, and I wasn't able to really kind of play anymore at the level that I really kind of wanted to play at. And at that point, it really kind of pushed me to a place where I had to really decide what I wanted to do. And I'd be lying if I knew what I wanted to do in high school or even at the beginning of college, just because in high school, typically when I was in kindergarten through 8th grade, I was a pretty good student. But in high school, I just became a teenager and started acting silly and doing dumb things and things of that nature, and really didn't, really pay attention or really put the proper attention to my studies while I was in high school. And that cost me in terms of where I was able to kind of apply for college and things of that nature. So essentially, I ended up going to college. I ended up going to community college first because my grades weren't that good, right? And I was so disappointed when it happened at that moment because I had this perception of community college that wasn't the best, right? And that obviously changed with time. But going to that community college, Westchester Community College, really kind of saved me in a lot of ways because it allowed me to really kind of press reset and really kind of say to myself, like, you know, this to me was like another chance for me to kind of like, you know, get on the right road. And when I was there, I was taking a lot of English classes, and I ended up being in a class with this professor called Passariello. She's a woman who grew up in that area of Westchester, and she just kind of really encouraged me to join the school newspaper and things of that nature. And at that point, I was just a business major just because all my friends were. So I started doing journalism, started writing, and you know, I got to a place where I was getting a lot of what I would say positive feedback. From editors in the school, from teachers as well. And at that point, I just decided that that's what I wanted to do, not out of love or out of passion, but I really felt like it was kind of my way out in a sense. And then I transferred to Brooklyn College, and I did journalism there, and I was able to work at places like the Amsterdam News and others. And it all kind of really worked out for me. And, you know, I'm extremely blessed. You know, I've had, you know, great moments, I've had bad moments, you know, like anyone else, but I wouldn't really trade it in for anything.
I love hearing that, saying that you went to community college, because some people have that perception that in order to work at a company like the New York Times, you need to come from an Ivy League school or something like that. So thank you for sharing that with us. You are one, if not the only, Afro-Latino working at the New York Times. Do you feel that you constantly have, are you the only one?
I mean, I'm not sure. I think there's other people that probably are. Oh no, there's one more. There's Sandra Evangelina Garcia too, who's excellent.
Okay, and Concepcion also.
And Concepcion as well. So there's a few. I think I'm the one that's more so. While they're journalists, obviously, and great at what they do, I'm more so embedded in the newsroom in a different way. So I'm more kind of talking to different people in the newsroom and have different conversations than they probably do.
Do you feel that you constantly have to prove yourself, or have you experienced any sort of imposter syndrome? Sometimes do you wonder, like, what I'm doing here? How do I get this job? I mean, did they make a mistake? Does that happen to you?
Oh no, absolutely. Like, I have a funny story. When before I got to the Times, I was at CBS, and the person who hired me, which was Justin Bank, who now works at NPR, he reached out to me and he was like, hey, we would love for you to come by and talk to us about local SEO, right? Local SEO is what I was doing at CBS, because I was managing SEO for like CBS New York, CBS Philly, CBS Houston, all these other things, right? And when he kind of extended that invitation, I looked at it as an opportunity to bring someone that was under me at that point, that was much younger, with me, right? So I brought her. I was like, hey, let's go to the New York Times. They're inviting me to kind of just chat with them. So I figure I would bring you, right? And I brought Samantha at the time, Samantha, who was on my team at the time. And we walked into the meeting, and I saw Justin look at me weird when I walked in with her. And it was like, whatever, right? And then Justin reached out to me on LinkedIn 2 weeks later, where he initially reached out to me, and he was like, hey, you know, you weren't supposed to bring her. It was really about you. And I was like, oh, and he was like, but I do appreciate you doing that, because, you know, I know a lot of people kind of look at the Times as this like magical thing, and you wanted to kind of include her. And that's kind of when the recruitment process started. So I never applied at the Times. They reached out to me through LinkedIn, and that's
oh my God, that is amazing. So you never actually
I never had any intention. I mean, obviously, you know, you always look at the Times as, you know, the pinnacle and things of that nature, but I wasn't looking for a job. I was pretty comfortable at that point in my life, and they just happened to reach out, and I went through 8 interviews or 9 interviews. I went through an interview at
why
7
so
in the
many?
morning. I don't know. I think after a while, like after like the 5th interview, I was like, you guys must want to hire me, because you're not throwing all these people at me for no reason, right? So you know, it worked out. I had my last interview was like at 7 a.m. and it was with the person who I worked with for like the majority of my time, who was Erin Symes. And you know, I give her a lot of credit for really kind of onboarding me here and allowing me to have the confidence. But when I first came on, I had tremendous imposter syndrome, right? Like I think one of the things about imposter syndrome is that, you get to a place, and usually this happens whenever you have a new job, is that you get to a place and you sort of forget everything you ever did, right? You forget that they hired you, right? That they wanted you, right? And I think a lot of times when you're a person of color, you look at it from like an affirmative action standpoint, right? Like, are you like, did they hire me because I'm a person of color, because I speak Spanish? Was there someone better, but they decided on me to fill a quota, right? And all those things are real feelings, and those at the same time are real hurtful feelings too, because those are things that, it may not necessarily be the case in your situation, but it's happened to a lot of other people at the same time. So it took me a little bit to kind of like really just, take my time at the times and really understand that I didn't have to hit a home run on day 1 or day 2 or day 3, and really just kind of have small wins as I came along. And that's my best advice to anyone that kind of encounters imposter syndrome, right? Like, just take a step back and really think about, the fact that you got hired there, right? And there was probably 10 people, 20 people that they interviewed, and you ended up being the best one, right? And you're there for a reason. And don't let the magnitude or don't let the prestige of a place make you forget everything that you accomplished before, because it's prestigious in its own right, right? So I think that's the extremely important thing about imposter syndrome. You got to find a way to combat it on a daily basis. It's going to stick there for a little bit, but you're going to find that period where you kind of hurdle it. And it took me like 2 or 3 months to really kind of settle in, and from there, I've been really, really kind of confident, and I think the majority of it for me was just kind of building relationships. I'm naturally a really chill person, and I'm kind of nice. I don't really like beef or do anything like that. So it was kind of really easy for me to kind of like ingratiate myself with a lot of the leaders in the newsroom. And it's really gotten me to a positive place in the organization.
Yes, and I have to say that you are very well respected, and I'm a witness of that. How do you keep up with the news? Are you on call 24/7? Or, I mean, about like Latino stories, do they know what is going on with the Latino community? Do you have to pitch specific stories to the newsroom?
Yeah. I mean, I think, a lot of my friends, some of them who may be on this call, they're always like, you're always working, you never stop working, right? And I think when it comes to content that revolves around people of color, I look at it as a responsibility for myself to really kind of push those things forward, right? And not necessarily just push those things forward when it's a negative news story, right? I think a lot of times when you look at news organizations, when they do cover a story that revolves around people of color, sometimes it's not necessarily the most heartwarming story, right? You run into situations like Breonna Taylor or George Floyd. You run into situations, with other communities as well, right? So, my goal has always been to kind of get to a place with the organization, and I have gotten to a place with the organization where we're not just reporting stories where, people of color are kind of being discriminated against or something's happening to them that's negative, but also kind of report those stories that are positive at the same time and find other avenues to really kind of promote them. One story that I really kind of stick to a little bit, that I would say, isn't a heartwarming story, but is the story of Nipsey Hussle, who was a rapper who died last March, I believe, or 2 years ago in March 2019. At that moment, when you think of, Latino celebrity, when you think of Black celebrity, you think of J-Lo, you think of Beyonce, you think of Jay-Z, right? But there's so many other celebrities in this space as well, right? That we know, because we grew up, listening to them or watching them or anything of the sorts. But, a white individual may only know top level Black and Latino celebrity, right? So I feel like it's my job, not only on celebrity topics, but on all topics that revolve around people of color, to really kind of inform them and educate them of the importance, of these specific news stories, right? Because when Nipsey Hussle happened, they were like, who is that? Like, we don't know who that is. And they weren't really going to write anything about it. And I really kind of pushed. And not that the numbers matter, right? Because they really don't, but it ended up being one of our top audience drivers for that specific year, and no one really expected it, right? So I really do believe that it's important, not just to be a person of color in a newsroom, but advocate as a person of color in the newsroom, right? And make sure that, when those topics are front and center, you're actually someone who is pushing for positive coverage or coverage as a whole around that community or communities. Another example is when Jose died, right? When Jose died, there were a lot of people that didn't know who he was. Yeah, that wasn't too long ago. Walter Mercado, I was going to say también, but Walter Mercado también, right? So like that's another example of someone who, you know, the newsroom may have not had the clearest idea of who they were, but it's extremely important to write about that topic because that's someone that's important to a segment of a community. And also at the same time to show that community that we do care about them, right? They may not typically read us, but we can pave the way for them to do so, you know?
Absolutely. I remember when I saw Romeo Santos on the front cover of the Times, I got so excited. It was like, oh my God, Romeo, you know, you feel like it's a family member or something like that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Many people feel journalism, it's mostly writing and reporting. You are doing something totally different, but it's still journalism. Why are you doing that? And what other areas can a journalist explore within journalism that doesn't necessarily need to be writing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, I think a lot of schools are getting to a better place, universities and colleges, of making sure that they're not just educating their students on how to write and edit, right? But also how to be video journalists, also how to be photo journalists, right? Like there's so many journalists that even, I mean, there's so many photographers that probably started off on Instagram and ended up getting bylines in the New York Times, you know, people that edit video that are doing the same thing, right? So there's so many different ways that, you know, you can be a journalist nowadays, and it just doesn't have to be with words. It could be with video, it could be with photo, it could be on social media. You could build your brand on social media. So there's so many different avenues. And what I really encourage is not only to practice and try it on your own, but also at the same time to make sure to take classes, right? Because there's so many classes that are free and so much guidance that's free on the internet that you can actually learn from and really kind of put into practice to become a better, well-rounded journalist. So I think, you know, the luck or the advantage of the digital age is that it doesn't just kind of limit journalism to words, it kind of expands it.
Absolutely. For SEO, let's go back to SEO. What do you take into consideration to a headline? Is there a secret strategy? What are the keywords relevant to SEO? It's something specific. What is the secret behind all of that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think with SEO, the main thing when you're thinking about headlines is that you want to make sure that the main term of the story is more closer to the beginning of the headline than the end, right? So if I have a story about the president, me putting the president towards the end of the headline, let's say the 8th or 9th word, is basically stripping importance from him in some respects. And I'm telling Google in some capacity that all the words in front of Trump at that point are more important than Trump, right? So our rule of thumb really is to make sure that we have any term that's important in a headline more towards the first 4 to 5 words, because based on the studies we've done, that essentially says that we can potentially perform better on search. And then outside of that, you know, when you have longer pieces of coverage, let's say you're covering an impeachment, right, on that day, right? Like we were covering impeachment today, you're not necessarily going to have impeachment at the front of every single headline or Trump at the front of every single headline. So you really kind of have to play a game of like, what is more important and what is not, right? So there's going to be 10 or 20 stories that we publish in one day are revolving around impeachment, but maybe, you know, there's 5 of them that we really consider to be extra important. And those are the ones that we're really going to optimize to the point. And by optimize, I mean kind of put a different headline and things of that nature to make sure that they're SEO focused. And then the other ones, we may play with them in a different manner, but we may not elevate them to that level of importance and focus on the other ones.
So today, anything with impeachment will probably go to the top?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, impeachment's the top news story of the day. Obviously, you know, you had the Capitol riots last week. You had an NBA trade today. So there's a lot of news that's just kind of like crashing on everyone that works in news. But impeachment is the story of probably the next week until the inauguration starts.
What was the word most searched in 2020?
In the world, probably coronavirus for sure.
Right.
Yeah, no question. Coronavirus for sure was the most searched word in 2020. And you know, despite the fact that coronavirus or COVID has kind of, you know, stayed around and stuck around, and now you're hearing things about variants and other aspects of the virus, it has slowed down a little bit in terms of like the public consumption of it. right? In terms of how many people are kind of searching for it. So it's still a big topic of interest, but it's not the topic of interest that it was, I would say, peak March all the way to maybe like September. And then that's kind of when election season took over and the election became sort of the big deal, at least domestically here in the US.
Should a reporter follow what is trending, or should do you have the responsibility to make sure that what is important become trending? How does that work? Do you follow the trend? Do you make your own trends?
Well, I mean, I think it runs in two ways, right? I think a reporter naturally, whether you cover the New York City Police Department, whether you cover the Yankees, you already kind of know, that coverage area in the way that you know it, right? So you're always going to be in the know about potential things that you can cover that are different or that are new, right? Where I think SEO and Google Trends and all these other tools come into play is that they can educate you at the drop of a dime, or they can inform you at the drop of a dime on things that are happening that you may not necessarily be aware of, right? So that's going to be the important thing, right? So you want to kind of use Google and SEO and social media as like a support system to where you're able to kind of look every day when you don't have a story, when you don't have something that you're gonna necessarily write, and see if there's something on your beat that's bubbling up that you don't know about, right? But I think at the same time, whether you're a veteran reporter, whether you're just starting off, really kind of understanding your beat, building those sources, and just expanding on your reporting is what's going to be important.
What is Google's most important ranking factor?
There's a lot. I think if you asked me this 5 years ago, it'd be something completely different, but I really think quality content, right? Obviously Google's not sending people to your website to like crawl your content or like scan it. They're sending sort of like robots, but they've gotten to a point where they're sophisticated enough to know when a website is writing content that's really thin or not valuable. And when a website is writing really valuable content that's rich, that's long on some levels, and can be a service to the readers that are obviously using Google to find that information. So for the most part, I think Google has gotten better. They're not perfect, but they have gotten better about surfacing up the best results in the search engine when it comes to any topics, right? Because, now, obviously, when you look at something like COVID and the coronavirus, you don't want Google to surface up results that say, oh, you can use, dishwashing liquid to cure it, right? Like 5 years ago, that could potentially penetrate the search engine, right? But they've gotten really sophisticated and really just much better about it, about what they kind of let stick in those primary positions and what they don't.
How many daily digital visitors have the New York Times? Do you have an idea?
Wow, a lot. We probably have, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 million maybe. We have a lot, I think. Yeah, I think we have like 20 to 30 to 40 million. I could be wrong, but it's a lot.
That is a lot.
I could be wrong though. I could be wrong. Yeah,
well, we have a lot of people that can, I imagine if you Google that, we should be able to find the answer, but it should be around that. Claudio, you are very active in social media, especially LinkedIn. I want to ask you about professional visibility and personal branding. Sometimes many of us might feel that, I'm bragging and showing off, what people's gonna think of me. Do you highlight your accomplishment on a regular basis, or do you work hard and wait for other people to recognize what you're doing?
I think it's a great question. One thing that I'm really big on saying is that I think as people of color, sometimes we're really, when you enter corporate environments that are predominantly white, you're kind of taught to, or you kind of navigate corporate environments or whatever job you may have, and you're sort of like subliminally taught not to celebrate your wins. And then you kind of like carry that over to every other job you have. So, every time that you kind of get celebrated for a win, you're like, oh man, thanks, I appreciate it. But then when you mess up on something, you feel it for like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And that's not how it should work, right? Like, if you mess up on something, of course, you're going to be upset, you're going to be sad, whatever it may be. But that doesn't mean that emotion of being upset and sad should completely like blanket when you do feel good about something that you did, right? So I don't think you have to put everything on social media. I don't think you have to celebrate everything on social media. But I think if it's something where you're trying to build your personal brand, you're gonna know what feels right to share and what doesn't feel right to share, and what may feel excessive and what may not feel. So when I'm on LinkedIn, for the most part, you know, I kind of use it to really kind of reach out and kind of mentor people, and really kind of extend that, just because a lot of people have done it for me in the past when I was growing up and entering journalism. But also at the same time, there are times where you have to celebrate. Like, you know, we were the #1 brand when it came to the elections. We beat broadcasters like CNN, like Fox, like NBC, like ABC, like CBS. We beat our competitors like the Washington Post. And an election is a very, very difficult thing to win. And we were able to win that in terms of visibility on the search engines. And I could have easily stayed quiet about it, but I didn't, right? I celebrated that win because I felt it was worth celebrating, right? And I think when you kind of put yourself out there at the same time, you know, you're going to get feedback, right? And the majority of the feedback that I get, I don't think I've ever gotten any negative feedback, but you also kind of invite yourself to become a figure, right? Which can be positive and which can be negative depending on your personality, right? I'm sort of kind of in the middle. Sometimes I don't shy away from the spotlight. Sometimes I'm like, you know, I don't want it, right? But it has opened a lot of opportunities for me, you know, both here in the US and overseas. And for me, it's really just kind of, I really look at it like, you know, you have an Afro-Latino guy, you know, however you want to view me, Black, Latino, speak Spanish, all that other stuff, right? However you want to view me, you know, I understand that I'm in a position that a lot of people aren't in, that are my color, that are my culture, that are my race, right? I run SEO at the New York Times. A lot of the people that run SEO at other news organizations are not my complexion. And I think, really, to be honest with you, it's really about, #1, showing people that, you know, there can be someone like you that ends up in this position, right? Through hard work, through doing things the right way. And I think when you look at it from an overseas perspective, whether you're talking about people in Spain or whether you're talking about people in Latin America, what I found at the same time is that, you know, they really look up to the New York Times, right? You know, they're not able to touch it in the same way that we are here in America, right? So they look at it like this really, you know, even more so prestigious publication. And I think I think the feedback I've gotten is like, wow, like, you know, there's a Latino guy running SEO at the New York Times and we want to get better about SEO, or we want to learn more about SEO. So it's really kind of opened avenues up for me in places like Chile and places like Mexico, in places even like Spain. So it's been beneficial. And I think at the end of the day, you'll know, you know, when it's right to share and when it's not right to share, or what is right to share and what is not right to share, you know?
And probably any other reporter will have the opportunity to have the visibility in Spanish-speaking countries like you do. So it's absolutely great.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't know, like, I love that you do all those things, because like you're teaching a class in Chile. I will never have known that if you haven't published that in LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I apologize.
No. And also something that I love is that you post in Spanish. Like, I'm going to do a personal story in here. Like, I'm always like shy to post in Spanish because, well, Spanish is my first language. And I don't want, like, sometimes you say, if I start like posting in Spanish, I will say, she's the Latina. And I just feel like, I don't know, self-conscious. Maybe it's something silly. But when I saw you doing it, I get like, I said, oh my God, you know what? It's probably something cool to do.
Yeah, no. You know, it's my first language. You know, I speak it with my girlfriend. I speak it with my parents still. You know, I speak it, you know, with my grandmas, you know, my extended relatives. But at the same time, I also felt, like I mentioned before, that, you know, there's so many people that use LinkedIn across the world and they're just not in the US. And I've really kind of taken my mind out of the state that it's just the US and the rest of the world. To me, it's the world, right? I just happen to live in the US, right? And I knew that there was just a bunch of opportunity to really kind of connect with a ton of people on social media through that avenue, right? And I've been able to, you know, appear on talks and, you know, in a lot of these countries. I was able to teach a class for 5 weeks in Chile. So I was, you know, speaking Dominican Spanish to Chileans, which was, you know, different, right? But, you know, it went great. It's a totally different accent, totally different words, things of that nature. But it was an extremely positive experience. I got a lot of great feedback, and I just don't shy away from it, right? Because I think, being able, you're bilingual for a reason, right? You can, you can speak to one, you can speak to anyone, right? And I felt like, all right, why am I just posting in English on this? Why can't I post in Spanish as well, and be able to kind of reach different people and create different relationships? So for me, it's about, just kind of like extending an arm, right? Like, I don't want to be the guy at the New York Times that people feel like that, I'm sure for a lot of years, like I was on a call earlier today talking with someone at USA Today, and they were like, hey man, like, I'm really grateful that you're talking to us because I had no idea who did SEO there. But I know that the SEO was successful, right? So I decided just to kind of step out front and center, right? And I think really when I tell you, and I sincerely mean it, it's really more about the visibility in terms of being a person of color, but also at the same time, I speak Spanish and I'm able to kind of connect with those people who are like, wow, like the guy that does SEO at the New York Times speaks Spanish and he's willing to talk to me, right? And I understand that, I've been the person that's emailed people that have been in way higher positions than I have, and they never wanted to talk to me. They never wanted to respond to me. And I just don't want to be that person, right? I want to be a person who's kind of open and really willing to help people out in the same way that I was helped out.
And this is the reason why you decided to mentor others, and you usually open a space in your calendar and you post in LinkedIn that you have time available for anybody that has questions, young professional.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I even talk to people at the Times who come into the organization and, just kind of want to get acclimated and go through the same thing we were talking about with imposter syndrome at the onset, and really kind of just easing their fears of the organization or easing their fears of just kind of like fitting in, right? So the mentorship that I do is pretty much 2 days a month for an hour. So pretty much not 2 days a month, 8 days a month. And there's 2 slots on a Monday and a Wednesday, and you can sign up for it. And we could talk for 30 minutes about, your resume. We could talk for 30 minutes about, any struggles that you're going through. And I try to help the best I possibly can, right? I don't know everything about everything, right? But if I can, open my space to you, I think, it could be beneficial on some level,
Claudio, I would like you to put on the chat the information of your calendar on how people can reach you.
Yeah, absolutely.
If anybody here wants to reach out to you, so they have the ability to do that. Being bilingual.
Yeah, I'll share right now while you.
Yeah, if you can do that,
go
yes, because I'm pretty sure that I'm going to go very soon to questions. Yes, anybody here that wants the opportunity to reach out to you, to speak to you, you are an amazing guy. I have to say that you even spent time with me in the cafeteria of the Times, helping me with my YouTube channel. I didn't even ask you. So you have a YouTube channel. I don't have subscribers, and you said, "Let's sit down," and you showed me what to do, what were the tricks. That was amazing. I have to tell you that I have almost 20,000 followers now. Thank you so much.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's so great. You see, and like with YouTube, it just takes time. It just takes time at the end of the day, and if you're really committed to like doing the work, you can really kind of get there. It does.
Claudio, being bilingual for you is a superpower?
Yeah.
Is a competitive advantages, or have you ever felt uncomfortable about talking Spanish, let's say at work?
Oh no, not at all. Not at all. I speak Spanish to everybody. And I think what's been great is that when I came onto the Times, and this is just being completely transparent, right? Like I was at CBS before this, and that's a huge brand. It's not the New York Times, but it's a huge brand, right? And I grew CBS, right? And at that point I was like, all right, like even when the Times came knocking on my door, I knew the Times, I don't want this to sound the way it sounds, but I knew the Times wanted me more than I wanted them, right? Because they were pretty persistent, right? And aggressive about getting me in the building, right? And I knew at that point, and I really kind of encourage people to think about this when they're going for jobs, is that I was like, you know what, I can go here and grow this, right? And it could be great, whatever. But if they want me this bad, what can I ask for that can kind of seal the deal? You know what I mean? And I wanted to work on New York Times in Espanol, right? And that was one of the main things that I said. I was like, I want to grow New York Times in Espanol. And New York Times in Espanol has gone through its things, right? But, I've been to Mexico so many times working with them. I still work with them. I'm still very involved in their product and making sure that they feel included, right? Because a lot of the times I'm working on, the president or the president-elect or, anything else that's in the news. But I make sure to kind of give them that time because I knew that was something that I wanted to do when I came into the building, and I'm extremely committed to it. So I do look at it as it's a superpower, and I do look at it as, I can advocate for things, or I can be an advocate for things that a lot of people in the office can't. And I have, a modicum of respect and power in the office, where I know, if something that's, Latino focused is not being covered, I'm really gonna push for it, right? And I know that, my energy behind that, along with others, can really kind of help get it done.
Claudio, what is the coolest part of being Dominican?
The coolest part about being Dominican, I think the family aspect. I think Dominicans are super fun, right? We just love everything, hanging out together, being together, going out, dancing, all that stuff. But I really think the family aspect of Dominicans is huge, right? You can have family conflict, you can have anything, right? But at the end of the day, people come together as one and really do love each other, right? And I think that's the important thing, and that's the thing that I really enjoy about being Dominican the most, which is kind of like the family aspect. I'm a really family-oriented guy. And, I spend a lot of time with my family, with the older members of my family, with the younger members of my family, like my sister who's on this call right now. So I would say that. If you wanted me to say a more fun answer, being Dominican, the music. Yeah, my girlfriend just said the music. The music. So the music is huge. Merengue, salsa, bachata, all that stuff. And being able to go out. This is a really hard time for Dominicans because we're not able to go out. But even at the same time, there's still Dominicans that are kind of skirting all the COVID practices and still hanging out together.
Oh, tell me about it. If you have to pick out a percentage, what will you say? Like, what Dominican, what are you, 70% Dominican, 30% American, 20% Black? If you have to pick a percentage.
No, I think I'm as a I think like all Dominican Americans, you ingest a lot of American culture, whether it's hip hop, rap, anything of the sort. We were born here, right? And English is our dominant language for the most part if we're born here. But what I would say is that in terms of like percentages,
yeah.
I think a lot in Spanish. I get upset in Spanish sometimes at work, outside of work. And I think just the way I am as a person and kind of how I operate, if I had to put a percentage, probably like 60 to 70 Dominican, and then everything else American and whatever kind of you want to like put there, like Black American, whatever it may be, right? But yeah, exactly.
Mango or pancakes?
Pancakes? No, mango, of course. What? I love pancakes, but mango, definitely, without question.
With los tres golpes.
Yeah, for sure.
R&B or bachata?
R&B or bachata? Wow. I'm more of a salsa guy, to be honest with you. I like bachata, but it's not like something that I'm not like gonna naturally like. I'm not gonna sit home and be like, you know what, I'm gonna play some Anthony Santos for the next hour, right? That's just not something I would do. But I'd play like, Gilberto Santa Rosa or Mark Anthony or Ruben Blades, stuff like that. So I would say probably R&B. I grew up on a lot of R&B and rap, so and R&B of the 90s is really unmatched in the early 2000s. So I would say R&B.
This is the last question and the one that will define how Dominican are you. Budweiser or Presidente?
No, come on. Presidente, like there's a lot of beers in front of Budweiser, that's for sure. So definitely Presidente, but Presidente more so from DR, right? Not Presidente from here, which is a little different. It's packaged discount here. Yeah, but I like Presidentes from DR that are, tú sabes, frío, right? So like you can see the ice on them, not like the ones that don't have the ice on them.
Claudio, thank you so much. Really want to thank you for this amazing conversation, and I would like to open it up for questions now. If you have a questions, you can open your mic and go right ahead. Don't be shy. Oh, you know what? I was looking at the. Hi, hey Karina.
gonna put the camera on. I was eating, sorry, I didn't want to see me eating. Hi, I'm Karina. I'm the president for the NAHJ chapter in New England. I'm in Boston. I work for Telemundo as a producer, and I just want to know, like, your transition, you said you were in CBS first, and then you went after the Times. So how easy or how difficult was that transition from television to print? Because I was a print reporter before, and then coming into TV, it was a shocker. But then I'm thinking of going back to it. Like, how was that?
I mean, I think in what I do as a job, it wasn't too much of a shocker. I think what was a shocker for me was, and I think every organization has differences in terms of like what they would call their editorial strategy or their content or what they write, right? But I think the bar was just different, right? Like I had to really adjust, right? At CBS, when I pitched ideas, I usually can get so many ideas through. Like if I wanted to pitch like, you know, a dog ordering food at Wendy's, right? Like they'd be like, all right, we'll write that, right? But like at the Times, that's never happening, right? Like the Times' editorial bar is so much higher. So what I essentially had to do was really, and I really advise people to do this at any job that they have, is really kind of learn people, right? Like I spent a lot of time really like studying different individuals at the Times. And as time went on in my first year, I was able to say, okay, like, this one has some soft spots, right? Like I could probably get this through this person, but this one I need to approach in a different way, right? Or I need to come with a very like high quality idea. And not that any of the ideas weren't high quality, but you get what I'm saying. But it wasn't really that much of a transition. What I would say is that I needed to up my editorial sensibility, right? Because it was something that I think was still very high, but it wasn't at tú sabes, como al nivel of the Times, right? It wasn't at that level, right? So that's kind of like the main thing. I think when you're a reporter, which, you know, I can't necessarily say I am now. I still consider myself a journalist, but my job doesn't call for me to write on a consistent basis. I could see how the print, I could see how the TV to sort of like a digital newspaper transition would be a hard one. But I really think number one, if I were to give you, you know, just some advice, you know, once you start at a place, the first person you meet, ask them to give you 5 names right away, right? And then the next person, ask them to give you 3. The next person after that, like if I can honestly tell you, I probably had like 40 coffees in my first 2 months at the Times. I had a coffee at 9, I had a coffee at 3. You know, I probably went broke at that point because those Bluestone coffees are like $7 each. But I really encourage you, like, to when you move to a new organization, just try to sit down with as many people as possible. And you don't have to sit down with people who do the exact same job that you do. You can sit with people that do graphics, that do tech, and everyone is going to have a different experience as to how they acclimated themselves to a place and how they, you know, felt comfortable in a place. So I really think doing that, not putting too much pressure on yourself, and really kind of learning the people around you is going to be extremely beneficial. I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
It does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Claudio. My name is Ashley. My question is, thank you so much. I'm super excited. I was so hyped about this sit down and this conversation. It's so needed and important. My question is, in the midst of the pandemic, I decided to launch my own online publication called Latina Watch. And you were talking about SEO and Google. Like, what free SEO or YouTubers do you advise for? Because I've worked at past publications and I was like, they're just not hitting the mark, at least for me. And I know my content, I identify as Afro-Latina, and I'm like, there's just so many. You mentioned like Jose and like Huerta Mercado, and I'm like, that's the content that is so needed and wanted. So if you have any, free resources, I'm all ears.
Yeah. I mean, after this call, if you want to, email me, I can definitely give you some. But just to like give you some tips at the onset. I think number one, if you're running a site, centered around Latinas, Afro-Latinas, both, whatever it may be, I think first off, you really kind of want to create, and I'm sure you already did this, like editorial strategy, but think of like the terms that are popular in your space, right? So is it a Latino journalism site? Is it just focused on Latino women, right? Like, so you really kind of want to think about the terms that people are searching for. Then you probably want to use a tool like Google Keyword Planner. Google Keyword Planner is free. You can kind of go in there, type in terms, things of that nature, and see like, all right, like these are the terms that people search when it comes to Latinas, right? And then you want to think of the competition, right? You want to think of the competition, which could be a lot, which could be not a lot, right? And see what articles they've done on this specific topic. And doing something as simple as like Latino women in media, or Latino women or Afro-Latino women in media, and seeing those articles that kind of rank in the first page can really give you a good idea of how to start off with content ideas and things of that nature. Now, when you start a new site, you know, it's going to be tough at the onset to really kind of gain that search visibility because Google doesn't know who you are, right? So it's going to take you a while. But one of the main things that you'll need to do as well is, if you're creating original content, you want to make sure that you're creating a partnership strategy on some level, right? So if you have something that you feel is valuable, find ways to get contacts for a lot of the websites that you feel are like competitors, or even websites that you really admire that do this kind of work, and reach out to them. Because if they're able to put their content on your site, or you're getting a link from a very authoritative site, that's going to send Google a signal that something with Latino Watch is happening and it's important, and we're going to boost them up in our visibility and our search rankings, right? So I really think it starts with just understanding what terms you want to win for. I really kind of veer you more towards an evergreen strategy, which is more focused on long-term, not today, right? Because it's like, you know, you can write about anything happening today, but everyone else in the world is. If you kind of specialize in a specific field, you can really kind of like corner the market in a sense. And it's going to take time, but if you're committed to it, you can make it work. And you can reach out to me on the side if, you know, for any other questions you have.
I realized I was muted. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries, no worries at all. No worries.
Do we have any other question? Claudio, and how was Mexico? You, Spain, you wrote an article about, but you were in Mexico for what, for 2 months during the pandemic?
No, I was in Mexico for a month. So me and my girlfriend went to Mexico for a month, and it was great. I go to Mexico City a lot because it's like one of my favorite cities. And I just like really like it there. Like if I lived anywhere else, I'd probably live in Mexico City. Yeah, it was great. We went to Mexico City, and then we went to Holbox and Tulum, and we were safe. You know, we were, you know, masks on the whole time, but we were able to get away. I was working the whole time though. It wasn't a vacation. It was a vacation, but it wasn't. You know, I was working the whole time, and then towards the end of it, I took like maybe 5 or 6 days off, and really kind of like just enjoyed myself. But it was great just being like in 90-degree weather and riding bikes and, you know, all that other stuff. So it was a positive experience.
Great, great. If you have a question, you have 2 minutes to make a question. Claudio is super nice. Don't be shy. Don't think about it. Just this is the chance.
And I have like 5 or 10 minutes if you have any questions, and then I gotta get back to impeachment land.
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Hi, so I'm Alexis, and I'm a television news reporter in Roanoke, Virginia.
Okay.
And out here, it's still a pretty small percentage of Latinos.
Mm-hmm.
And in my company, I'm the only one. I'm the only Latino there. And this is the second time I've been in a situation where I'm the only person, either of color or the only Latino. I'm struggling with trying to keep my own identity around when I don't have many people who look like me, sound like me, and I'm battling this weird feeling of I'm trying to be myself, but I can't quite do that exactly either in my profession sometimes because the demographic I'm serving might look too different. Yeah. What advice do you have maybe for me who's kind of battling this weird moment?
That's a great question. You know, the easy answer is to be yourself, right? Easy, right? That's the very easy answer in all of these things. But I really think in these situations, the best thing that I really think you can do is step into your Latinidad more, right? Like almost, you know, and I know we have the tightrope, right? Like, you know, we always can't show up as ourselves in the office, right? But I think stepping into your Latinidad even more will be beneficial. Like really kind of, you know, even if it's from a coverage perspective, like you said, there's not maybe a high percentage of Latinos in Roanoke in the way that there may be in Northern Virginia. I'm not sure exactly where, right? But I think what's going to be important is really kind of advocating and saying why you think those communities are important to cover, and making it something where that organization as a whole has to really think about it. And you're gonna know, and I know that may not be a perfect answer, but you're gonna know when you're probably gonna know when there's the moments to step forward, and then there's the moments to kind of like, all right, I'm gonna fall back on this one, right? But I think really stepping into it, really talking about like the concerns in that community, from that community, or the great stories from that community, right? Because the reality is, if it's 3% now, it's probably going to be 5% in a year. It's probably going to be 10% in 2, right? So it's going to keep growing, right? So you could be at the forefront of really covering this community in the same way that you're covering all the other communities in that area. So my best advice would be really kind of go into, and I'm sure you're already doing this, go into those communities, really talk to them about what they're struggling with, talk to them, find the great stories in those communities, and really bring it back to the office in a way where you're able to say like, hey, you know, these are stories that are valuable to cover. This is a community that is growing in our area, and at the same time is underserved, all right? And I think as long as you're kind of able to step into it a little more, you'll be fine. And I feel like that feeling will dissipate a little bit the more you feel like you're representing them on some level, if that makes sense. So I really, and I know it's hard, right? I've been there. I'm sure everyone on this call has in some respects, right? But don't be afraid to step into it, because sometimes we work off assumptions that may not necessarily even exist, right? Because of our past experiences, right? And I'm guilty of that even today, right? In my own like, you know, navigating life and media and things like that. So don't let your mind tell you, you know, lies that don't really exist, right? Just kind of like step into it, do what you need to do. And, you know, I could promise you that, you know, the work that you do in Roanoke, if you want to stay in Roanoke, that's fantastic. It'll even lead you to bigger and better places if you decide to, you know, move in whatever direction you want to move in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Claudio, thank you so much. Thank you to our president, Natalie, and our board member, Bianca Silva. Thanks to all of you for being here. This has been great. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. And like I said, if you want to do any mentoring, I left a link in the chat and you can sign up for 30 minutes if you want to talk further. And if you want to reach out to me, email, Twitter, whatever it may be, Instagram, feel free.
What is your Instagram, Claudio? I couldn't find you on Instagram.
My Instagram is Claudio.e.Cabrera. Okay. So my full name, just with the .e.
Perfect. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today, okay?
Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys, all right?
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.